The journey of human civilization has always been towards progress. We have moved on from our discovery of fire, then wheels, then machines. And we consider that as going from good to better. But are we just gaining? Aren't we losing a lot of things as well? And who is a better poet than William Wordsworth to tell us what we have lost in the way and the way we have got out of tune in his memorable sonnet, The World is Too Much with Us. I have made a lot of videos on William Wordsworth already, and you already know that he was the principal figure to introduce romantic movement in England. It was his collaborative work with Coleridge, that is, the lyrical ballads, which set the tone of romanticism in poetry. And if one could try to describe Wordsworth in a phrase or two, you would call him a nature worshipper. How does a nature worshipper look at the rapid growth of industry around him? When Wordsworth was writing, it was a time when England was changing and industrialization was exponential in its growth. In this sonnet, we will see how Wordsworth responds to that change, to that so called progress, and how he laments what civilization is losing or was losing at that point of time as a price that it paid. Let's look at the poem itself. The world is too much with us, late and soon, getting and spending. We lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours. We have given our hearts away, a sordid boon. Although Wordsworth was writing this poem in the 19th century, somehow I feel that his words become even more relevant in today's context. What is he saying? He is saying that the world is too much with us. What is this world he is talking about? He is talking about the material world, that of the city, our jobs, our innumerable financial obligations, everything that is basically controlling our lives in a very unhealthy manner. And see, we are, going from one shopping mall to another, from one shopping app to another. Spending and getting is all we are doing at the moment. So, this rise in consumerism, this rise in constant dependence on the material world is what he is regretting. And why is that a cause of concern for him? We lay waste our powers. What powers did human beings have before this consumerism invaded us? Human beings had the power to connect with nature, to get inspired by nature. Little we see in nature that is ours. Now look around you. What do you see in nature? You see a tree outside your house, but that tree doesn't belong to you. The pond, the lake, the hilltop, nothing belongs to you. Earlier, when we were, say, hunter gatherers, or in our earliest days of civilization, then we possessed as a community an entire village. And the ponds of the village, the rivulets, the forests, everything belonged to the community. So there was a connect between man and nature. Now we have gotten ourselves into these small little compartments of selfish living where we are completely disconnected from our environment. And when you apply these lines to today's context, can you imagine boarding a train, getting a window seat, and not putting your headphones on? No, because you need that. But if you were connected with nature, you would simply gaze out of that window and look at the rushing fields. And that would be enough for you. You don't need that additional entertainment on your mobile phone. This is what he's talking about. That we lay waste our powers to connect to nature. This is what he says, that we do not feel connected to the natural objects around us. We do not feel like it belongs to us. The bird feels that the sky is its territory. The fish in the ocean, it feels that the ocean belongs to it. But we do not feel that this earth belongs to us. We feel disconnected. We have given our hearts away. Hearts means our emotions, things that was connecting us to nature. And he calls this situation a sordid boon. Now, the word sordid means something which is dull, full of drudgery, and boon is a blessing. So, how can you say that a blessing is a drudgery? This is an oxymoron where he is placing two opposite words together to actually create a startling effect. And what effect is that? The boon that he is talking about, the blessing that he is talking about, is the blessing of the material world, the rise of civilization through industry, progress of science. But this is a sordid thing because this progress or so called development is actually taking human beings away from their sense of belonging to nature, to their sense of comfort in their environment. This sea that bears her bosom to the moon. Now, in romantic poetry, we have often seen poets personifying objects of nature. What is personification? When an inanimate object or an abstract idea is seen to function like a human being. So, the sea is like opening up her bosom to the moon, and it's a very amorous act. It's like the sea and the moon, they are lovers. And it's an act of love that is describing. The winds that will be howling at all hours and are upgathered now like sleeping flowers. So, what is this upgathered? At night, many of the flowers close their petals. It's like they fold up, and again in the morning they open up. So, upgathered flowers is used in this simile here that the winds are upgathering. So, while with the sea, he is giving an image of opening up, with the flowers, he is giving the image of closing. That means in nature, he can see both aspects. And this is because nature contains within itself all the opposing elements too. So in the night, the sea bares itself and the flowers upgather their petals and close while they are sleeping. For this, for everything, we are out of tune. But everything that is happening in nature has no effect on us. We are not excited by it anymore. We are not comforted by it anymore. We have no impact on us by these natural things. It moves us not. And this is the first part of the sonnet. Now, usually in a sonnet, we have two parts, octave and sestet. If you look at the number of lines we have already read, you would see we have already read 8.5 lines. Usually, the sonnet writers make a break with 8 first lines as octave and then 6 lines as sestet. What Wordsworth does is he is not finishing his octave right at the end of the 8th line, but he kind of flows into the 9th line to the middle of it, and then we have the volta. Volta is the turning point between the octave and the sestet, where you have a shift from the first perspective to a different perspective. Like a thesis is given and an antithesis is given, a proposition is given and a solution is offered. So, if that is the situation here, what is the alternative? What is the solution that he comes up with? Great God. So, he's addressing God here. Now, this does not mean he is addressing the Christian God. He is addressing God in general, the great creator. I'd rather be a pagan, suckled in a creed outworn. Now, we know that in this world there are many tribes and communities who stay very close to nature. And it had been so even in early times. So he says that I want to be born. Suckled means I want to be brought up. I want to be a child suckling at my mother's breast in a tribal community which is probably outworn now, which doesn't exist anymore. And he's specifying the word pagan. Pagans are those who worship nature. And in pagan religion, you have different forms of deities, sometimes the sea god, the sun god, the moon goddess, and so on. So, whichever religion worships nature is considered to be in some way pagan, although technically we associate it with Greek religion. A pagan suckled in a creed outworn, outdated. Tribe outdated, so might I. standing on this pleasantly. So he is at this moment when he's writing this, he is standing on a very pleasant valley. And he says that if I was born in a pagan world or in a pagan community, then would have done what? Then I could have an awareness of the natural gods. What natural gods he refers to? Have glimpses that would make me less forlorn. I am now standing in a valley looking at various natural things in front of me. If I was a pagan, I could appreciate the divinity in these natural forms, have sight of Proteus rising from the sea, or hear old Triton blow his wreathed horn. So he's mentioning two Greek names here. It is a case of allusion. He's alluding to these Greek mythological figures, trying to say that if I was born in this culture, I could visualize these mythologies in front of me. But since I am born in a culture which believes in an orthodox religion, so I am denied that kind of comfort. So let's quickly try to know who Proteus was and what was the case with Triton. Proteus was the prophetic old man of the sea, and he used to take care of seals and all those sea creatures. And since Poseidon was the sea god, so Proteus was Poseidon's subject. Now this Proteus was a prophet. He knew everything about the past, present, future, but he did not want to tell people about it. Like he hated to divulge the information. So, how to get information out of him? The only way you could get information out of him is to go to his island where he would take a nap in the afternoon on the seaside and surprise him, bind him. And when he would do that, he would take all kinds of shapes. So, he is a shape shifter. But if you could hold fast to him and not let him go, he would return to his proper shape and then he would give you whatever answer you required and he would plunge back into the sea. So, this is the interesting story of Proteus. What about Triton? Triton was the son of Poseidon. So, both these mythologies or mythic figures are connected to the sea. Triton lived with his parents in a palace on the bottom of the sea, and he had a conch shell, shunk, and he would blow it. In many of the illustrations, he is visualized as a merman, that is, half man, half fish. So, in those two figures that he is mentioning, we have this idea of polytheism. Paganism is polytheism. So, we can say Wordsworth is also challenging the modern city life's experience of a homogeneous religion. You don't have any individuality. In a polytheistic setup, what happens? You have options of multiple gods, multiple rituals, like we have in Hinduism, right? But when it comes to monotheism, then what happens? It kind of takes away the individuality of the worshipper. You don't get to choose whom you're going to worship. So, in a way, Wordsworth was probably also hinting that what appears as modernization, industrialization is also a process of homogenization where you lose your individuality and you lose your connection with nature on an individual level. You are just a consumer in a market. Your value doesn't depend on your individuality, but on your existence within the mass. Now, does that mean he's saying that everybody should turn pagan? No. He's saying that that was a time when you could hope for individual experience. Now is a time when the individual doesn't exist. It's always we are part of the world, and a world which we have no control on, which we can consume, but we cannot choose. So he is not offering an alternative religion here. He is offering at least a question that are we happy? Don't we feel suffocated by so much of progress? where we are taken away from basic, fundamental moments of happiness which we could have felt earlier, looking at the sea, looking at the valley, looking at the green hills, in a world where the sea god and the characters around him were part of rituals and worship. That intimate connection is lost, and this is something that the pantheist in Wordsworth, the pantheist as in a person who believes that nature is God, that everything is connected, and actually worships this connection. Wordsworth's pantheism is something I've already talked a lot about, but I still want to talk a little more now. That pantheism means, pan means all, theism means belief. So he believes in everything being connected through a spirit. It's not like the tree is God or the hill is God. No. There's a spirit which runs through everything, even through human beings. So a spirit which is a connecting force. And believing in this spirit that connects all, which pans across, you can say, is pantheism. Wordsworth is lamenting what here? He is lamenting the loss of that connection. So, this sonnet, which was published in 1807, is still relevant today because we have never recovered from that disconnect. And sonnets like this establish the fact that poets like Wordsworth were one of the first environmentalists we had in England. I hope I've explained this poem to you in a way that makes sense. Do let me know if this sonnet is there in your syllabus or you just saw this video because you wanted some more of Wordsworth from me. I'll see you all very soon in our next video. Till then, stay subscribed. This is Monami Mukherjee signing off. Bye bye.